Emily Monroe vanished on an otherwise unremarkable Wednesday. The sky over Brookridge, Oregon, had the kind of softness that made everything feel safe. Autumn had just begun to tint the maples lining Ashford Street with threads of gold and amber, and a faint bite in the air promised a crisp afternoon ahead. Rachel Monroe, 38, stirred sugar into her coffee as the morning news mumbled from the small television mounted in the kitchen corner. Her daughter's voice floated in and out of the background, narrating a story about a classroom turtle and a friend named Janelle who had spilled orange paint all over her backpack the day before. Rachel smiled to herself, amused at how earnestly Emily described the chaos. She admired the girl's ability to weave drama into the smallest events. That was Emily, observant, expressive, always finding color in the ordinary. At 9, she had a way of narrating life like a little poet, one who made even a lunchbox sandwich sound magical. She was small for her age, with long dark hair that she insisted on tying into uneven braids, and a blue birthmark behind her right ear that Rachel swore looked like a tiny feather. Emily called it her lucky stamp. Their morning routine was like clockwork. Rachel would wake at 6, prep for her 12-hour shift at the county clinic, then wake Emily by 6:30 with a gentle nudge and a kiss to the forehead. Emily dressed herself, brushed her teeth, and came down for breakfast, usually cereal or toast with cinnamon sugar. By 7:30, Rachel would pack Emily's lunch, a turkey sandwich, apple slices, and sometimes a note that read things like, "You're my sunshine," or "Remember to be brave today." At 7:45, Emily would throw on her purple fleece jacket, sling her backpack over her shoulder, and insist on walking herself to school. That was where their morning split. Rachel, hesitant at first, had agreed to let Emily walk alone a few months prior. The school was just 3 blocks away, and the path was filled with other children, crossing guards, and shop owners who knew them by name. It was a sleepy, familiar route in a town where nothing truly bad ever seemed to happen. That's what everyone used to say. Brookridge was a place where people left doors unlocked, and kids still played hopscotch on the sidewalk. Rachel stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching Emily leave. She always watched until her daughter turned the corner at Dawson's Market. Emily never failed to turn around, wave with both hands, and give her mother that big-toothed smile that made her eyes crinkle. That morning was no different. Emily turned, waved, and disappeared around the corner. Rachel left for work soon after. She drove the 7 minutes to the clinic, parking in her usual spot near the back entrance. She spent the next few hours moving between exam rooms, checking vitals, logging patient reports, and adjusting medication charts. It wasn't until a few minutes past 3 in the afternoon that her cell phone buzzed in the break room. It was the school secretary. Emily hadn't shown up for class. Rachel's stomach flipped. She called back immediately, convinced it was a mistake. Maybe Emily had gotten sick and asked to go home. Maybe a teacher had forgotten to mark attendance. But the voice on the other end was certain. Emily never arrived. The teacher had assumed she was absent due to illness, but now, hours later, no one had called to excuse her. Rachel's car barely touched the ground as she sped back through town. She retraced the path from their home to Brookridge Elementary in her mind, down Ashford, past Dawson's, across the crosswalk on Mendel Avenue, and into the front gate. It was a walk that usually took less than 10 minutes. She parked in the school's fire lane and bolted inside, heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the receptionist's words. The principal joined them. A teacher, then a police officer who happened to be dropping off paperwork for a different matter. In the hour, a formal missing child report was filed. Detectives canvassed the street. Local businesses were asked for security footage. Dawson's Market had one camera pointed at the front lot, but the image was grainy. They caught a brief glimpse of a girl walking, but her back was turned, her hair in a braid, and her jacket a blur of purple. It could have been Emily. Or it could have been someone else. The timestamp was approximate. Search teams mobilized by sunset. Volunteers from town joined, walking every route between home and school with flashlights, calling Emily's name into the early October air. Rachel walked beside them at first, calling out until her voice cracked. She checked alleyways, behind dumpsters, under porches. When it grew dark, she stood in the middle of Ashford Street, lit only by the red and blue strobe of patrol cars, staring toward the corner where Emily had last waved at her. By midnight, the media had the story. A news van parked in front of Rachel's house, its satellite antennae casting a surreal silhouette against the early morning sky. The story went national within 48 hours. Headlines read, "Small-town girl vanishes on walk to school." By day 3, Emily's face was everywhere, on milk cartons, utility poles, online forums. The town held prayer vigils. A cash reward was offered, but leads dried up quickly. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, no eyewitness reports, no ransom note, no vehicle descriptions, no screams, no torn clothing, no dropped belongings. No witnesses, just a vanished girl and the suffocating silence she left behind. Police searched Emily's room for clues. Her desk still had a sticky note with spelling words written in her looping scrawl. Her bed was neatly made, a collection of stuffed animals resting in a half moon. Her journal was open to a half-written sentence that trailed off. Rachel sat on the edge of her daughter's bed that night, holding one of Emily's stuffed bears to her chest, inhaling the faint scent of bearsmear barium that still clung to the fabric. She didn't sleep, and no one ever found Emily's purple backpack. At the end of the first week, the story started slipping out of the headlines. Another child missing in another state, another scandal, another distraction. But Rachel never stopped waiting. She left the porch light on every night. She kept Emily's room exactly the same. She updated the posters every few months when the corners began to curl. The police told her that in many cases the first 72 hours were critical. After that, the odds declined sharply. But Rachel never believed in odds. She believed in gut feelings, in dreams, in that last wave Emily had given her that morning. She held on to it. By the 4th day of Emily's disappearances, Brookridge had begun to change. The streets no longer felt safe, even under the daylight that used to warm the sidewalks like a familiar touch. Parents walked their children to school again, even those who hadn't done so in years. Every stranger's face now held the potential to be dangerous. A week ago, no one locked their front doors. Now they double-checked them before bed. The town's innocence, once unshakable, had been quietly replaced by something colder, harder to name. But Rachel noticed it in every conversation, every sideways glance, every lowered voice at the grocery store. The investigation consumed Rachel's life. She took unpaid leave from the clinic, too distracted to concentrate, too fragile to treat patients. Instead, she pored over reports, maps, grainy footage, and transcripts. Detective Marlowe, the lead on Emily's case, visited the house daily that first week. He was kind, professional, with gray streaks in his hair and the kind of tired eyes that had seen too many cold cases. He carried a leather notebook wherever he went and often paused before asking questions, as if trying to soften their impact. He confirmed what Rachel already suspected. No witnesses had seen Emily after she turned the corner by Dawson's Market. No children, no shop owners, no passing drivers. No sounds of distress, no screams. It was like she had simply walked off the map. One camera had captured a figure that matched Emily's build, but the footage cut out before she reached the edge of the frame. Another camera across the street had been out of service. A third, inside a florist's shop, had too much glare from the glass to show anything clearly. Technology failed in the places it was needed most. The purple backpack, the one with the unicorn patch Emily had ironed on herself, was never recovered. For weeks, Rachel clung to the hope that its discovery would lead to something. A clue, a trace, anything. But no torn strap, no dropped notebook, no lunchbox with her name on it ever turned up. The silence around the backpack became its own kind of terror. Flyers were distributed statewide, a hotline was set up, psychics called in, claiming visions. Rachel listened to every one. Most were vague, others clearly manipulative. One woman described a barn and a dirt road. Another insisted Emily had been taken by someone in a blue car with out-of-state plates. Police chased all leads. None panned out. The hotline logged hundreds of calls, but the database remained empty of meaningful hits. Then came the janitor. A man named Howard Bell, who had once worked part-time cleaning at Brookridge Elementary, was arrested in a neighboring town on unrelated charges. Someone called in an anonymous tip suggesting he had shown inappropriate interest in Emily. The media latched onto the story. Headlines shifted from missing child to possible predator. Howard had a record. He had served time for a misdemeanor decades ago, unrelated to children, but the stain of suspicion clung quickly. Rachel sat with Detective Marlowe in the precinct the day they questioned him. She wasn't allowed in the room, but she watched through a screen in a nearby office. Howard was agitated, defensive, denied everything. He hadn't seen Emily in over 6 months, he said. She barely knew his name. He never spoke to her, never touched her, never even looked at her. He broke down twice during questioning. Forensics ran tests on his belongings, his car, his apartment, his clothing. They found nothing. No hair, no fibers, no blood, no connection to Emily whatsoever. His alibi for the day of the disappearance was solid. He had been at his cousin's house across town, helping her move furniture. She confirmed it. Phone records confirmed it. Confirming it, confirmed it. After 3 days, Howard was released. No charges, no arrest, but the town had already made up its mind. His face was on every television, his name whispered in every coffee shop. He moved away a week later. Rachel didn't know what to think. Part of her had wanted it to be him. As horrible as that sounded, she needed someone to blame, someone to focus her grief and fear on. But another part of her, deeper, colder, knew it wasn't. The feeling wouldn't go away. That heavy, wordless certainty that Emily had not been taken by someone familiar. By week 3, media attention began to fade. Reporters left town. The reward remained posted, but fewer calls came in. Volunteers began returning to work, to routines, to their own families. The search parties, once numbering in the hundreds, shrank each day. Rachel kept walking the route, over and over, morning and evening, from their house, past Dawson's Market to the school, then back again, hoping to notice something, anything, others might have missed. One evening, as she walked, the wind picked up. Dry leaves scattered along the sidewalk, skittering like whispers. Rachel paused outside Dawson's Market, staring at the corner where she had last seen Emily wave. She stood there for several minutes, a woman pushing a stroller past, then a jogger with earbuds. Life was moving on. Hers wasn't. She began taping a new poster to the utility pole nearby. It was the 4th version she had made. Each one featured a slightly older photo of Emily. This time her daughter's face was more centered, more direct. Rachel had cropped it so that Emily's eyes seemed to look directly at whoever read it. "Have you seen me?" the caption asked. She knew people looked away faster now. They didn't want to be reminded. Emily had become part of the background noise of tragedy, something others sympathized with but didn't linger on. Rachel couldn't blame them. The world was heavy enough already. But she refused to stop. Back home, her house was unchanged. Emily's room remained untouched. Rachel hadn't moved a single item. The stuffed bear was still propped on the bed. The pink curtains still let in soft afternoon light. The bookshelf still had the fairy tale collection they had been reading before everything fell apart. Rachel sat at the edge of the bed and opened Emily's journal again, the one the police had scanned for clues. The final entry was a half-finished sentence. "I think tomorrow." It ended there. The pencil mark dragged slightly at the end, like her hand had been pulled away mid-thought. Rachel stared at the sentence, rereading it again and again. The silence in the house was its own kind of noise now. It echoed, it pulsed. It reminded her, moment by moment, that no one knew where Emily had gone, that all they had were fragments, unconnected, incomplete, no sounds, no sightings, no traces, no evidence. Just silence. The fallout from Howard Bell's release left more than just a vacancy in the suspect list. It exposed fractures in the town's sense of justice and in Rachel's increasingly fragile hope. When Howard was arrested, it had been like someone had thrown open a window in a suffocating room. People believed, or wanted to believe, that there was a face to blame, a man to prosecute, a story to tie up the terrible uncertainty. But once the tests came back negative and his alibi stood confirmed from every angle, that window slammed shut again, and with it, any illusion that answers were coming soon. Rachel had not spoken during the press conference announcing Howard's assassination. She stood just off stage, arms crossed tightly, watching the police chief deliver the news with all the measured caution of a man walking on ice. Detective Marlowe stood nearby, his hands folded in front of him, his jaw tight. After the microphones were turned off and the reporters dispersed, he had offered Rachel a ride home. She declined. She walked instead. As she moved past the empty sidewalk outside Dawson's Market, Rachel remembered something, how, just days after Emily vanished, one of the store clerks mentioned seeing Howard near the corner earlier that week. It hadn't seemed significant at the time. Howard had been doing some odd jobs since his contract with the school expired, but now Rachel questioned why he had been in that exact area alone and what his presence really meant. She visited the school again, retracing every space Howard might have accessed: the janitor's closet, the back stairwell, the staff parking lot. She spoke to the principal, the librarian, the cafeteria workers. Most had little to offer, but one teacher, Mrs. Delaney, hesitated when asked. She recalled Howard once mentioning a niece who resembled Emily. Something in the way he said it had struck her as odd, even rehearsed, but she couldn't remember when or in what context. Rachel held on to the detail anyway. At night, Rachel sat with Emily's yearbook open on her lap, circling every face of every adult who might have come into contact with her daughter. Names she had seen before: PTA volunteers, field trip chaperones, part-time tutors suddenly became potential threats. She began documenting timelines, creating a board on the living room wall with post-it notes and photos, like something from a detective drama. It was the only way to keep the darkness at bay. It gave her something to build, something to fight with. Meanwhile, Detective Marlowe kept her updated when he could. He knew Rachel was not simply a grieving mother. She was, by now, a partner in the case, relentless in her pursuit, unwilling to be placated. Marlowe didn't patronize her. He never told her to rest or move on. He respected her instincts, even when they led nowhere. Then came the letter. 3 weeks after Howard's release, Rachel found a plain envelope tucked into her mailbox. No return address, no postage stamp. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed. It read only this: "You're looking in the wrong places." She wasn't taken by a stranger. Rachel's hands trembled as she read the words again and again. The letter had no fingerprints, no distinctive marks, nothing to trace. Marlowe ordered a forensic analysis, but the results came back clean. No DNA, no residue. Whoever sent it had been careful. The phrase burned into Rachel's mind, repeating louder than any news anchor, more piercing than any whisper from the townspeople. She wasn't taken by a stranger. That night, Rachel stood outside on the porch, staring down the street that led to Dawson's. Her mind twisted through the possibility that someone she knew had done this. A teacher, a neighbor, a family friend? The idea sent her into a silent panic. She began re-examining every interaction in the days leading up to Emily's disappearances, every birthday party guest list, every play date, every visit to the grocery store, the library, the church. She remembered something that had slipped past her in the chaos. 2 nights before Emily vanished, Rachel had answered a call from an unfamiliar number. It was a woman's voice, soft and polite, asking if Rachel had any interest in enrolling Emily in a new after-school program. The call hadn't lasted more than 2 minutes, and Rachel had politely declined. But now, she couldn't remember the name of the program. She checked her call log, but the number was blocked. She had assumed it was just marketing spam. Now she wasn't so sure. She brought it up to Marlowe. He listened, took notes, and promised to check for similar reports. Over the next week, they discovered 2 other parents in Brookridge had received similar calls, both regarding daughters in elementary school. Neither had enrolled their children. The caller had vanished after the initial conversation. Then another envelope arrived. This time it was hand-delivered, left on Rachel's windshield while she was inside the library. Inside, a single sentence, typed in the same anonymous format. "Not a stranger. Look closer to home." That same day, Rachel noticed something else. On her back porch, the wind chime Emily had made in kindergarten painted blue with crooked stars was missing. She searched the yard, the bushes, the porch stairs. It was simply gone. Nothing else had been disturbed. The gate was still locked, the back door secure. It was as if someone had reached in and taken only what mattered. That sense of violation left Rachel shaking. When she reported it, police dusted for prints, canvassed the neighbors, reviewed traffic cam footage. As always, nothing. No one had seen anything. Rachel felt the walls closing in. It wasn't just the uncertainty, it was the quiet precision of it all. Whoever was doing this was watching, waiting, measuring every move. Marlowe arranged for patrols near her home. He increased pressure on the department to follow up on every minor tip. But even he looked warier now. The case was beginning to stretch beyond the edges of what the town could contain. They needed something concrete. A break, a misstep, anything. One night, unable to sleep, Rachel returned to the corner by Dawson's and stood under the flickering streetlight. The air was cold, still. She looked at the sidewalk where Emily's footsteps had last been seen. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine it, Emily walking, backpack bouncing, maybe humming, maybe thinking about a story she would tell her teacher. And then gone. The image fractured her. 2 months after Emily's disappearance, just as the last of the fall leaves turned brittle and the first frost crept along the gutters of Brookridge, the call came in. A pair of hikers walking near Hartman River, roughly 10 miles north of town, had found a child's shoe near the muddy bank. It was small, coated in dried silt, and pink with faded glitter around the heel. Rachel received the news at 8:37 a.m. on Monday. Detective Marlowe called her directly. His voice was measured, as always, but Rachel heard the edge of caution in his tone. He told her they needed her to look at the shoe. Rachel arrived at the station within 30 minutes. Her eyes were hollow from another night of broken sleep, her breath clouding in the morning chill. Marlowe met her in the lobby and escorted her to a small side room where the shoe sat on a mattering the same night at the table near the coach. A single soft light overhead illuminated it like evidence in a courtroom. Rachel stared at the shoe. Her heart began to pound. She had bought a pair just like it months before Emily vanished. The same pink, the same sparkles. But memory is slippery, and hope can twist details to match longing. Still, her throat tightened. Her hand trembled slightly as she pointed at it. "It looks like Emily's. It might be." Marlowe nodded solemnly. Forensics had already taken samples. They were working on identifying any DNA or organic trace. A few brown strands of hair were found near the insole, but they were inconclusive until results returned. Marlowe didn't offer false promises. He never did. He said they'd know in 48 hours. Those next 2 days stretched like wire. Rachel didn't leave the house. She sat in Emily's room, holding the other shoe from the pair. She had found it in the back of the closet the day after the phone call. She hadn't looked for it before, hadn't thought she needed to, but now, with one shoe possibly linked to Emily, every detail mattered. The two shoes were nearly identical, but not quite. A small scratch near the heel of Emily's left shoe was missing from the one found at the river. So was the sticker Emily had added to the sole, a tiny rainbow with her initials. Rachel tried not to read into it. She told herself it could have fallen off, could have faded. But she already knew the answer in her bones. When the results came back, Marlowe didn't make her come in. He called her from the parking lot of the school where he had been speaking to the principal about another unrelated incident. His voice was gentle. The hair wasn't Emily's. The shoe didn't match any known clothing from her inventory. The DNA found belonged to a girl from a town 2 counties over, another child who had gone missing the previous year, later found safe after running away from home. The shoe had washed downstream during a flood 2 months earlier. The family had confirmed it. Rachel thanked him. She hung up the phone and sat in silence on the couch, staring out the window at the dead tree in the yard. She didn't cry. She didn't speak, but something inside her dimmed further, a kind of numbness, a dull roar of emotion with nowhere left to go. This wasn't the first false alarm. There had been sightings reported from other towns. A girl in a fast food restaurant in Springfield who looked just like Emily, until it turned out she was a tourist from Colorado. Another tip led to a small traveling fair outside Eugene where someone thought they saw a girl with a unicorn backpack, but it had been a coincidence. Rachel began to understand the cruelty of hope. It wasn't the absence of answers that broke her. It was the promise of one, dangled just close enough to grab, only to dissolve again and again. Still, she refused to stop looking. She returned to the river site 3 days later. Marlowe had offered to accompany her, but she declined. She wanted to walk the muddy path herself to see what the hikers saw. The area was dense with brush and rock, the river narrow but fast-flowing this time of year. She imagined a child walking alone there, the steep drop into the water, the slippery edge, but something didn't sit right. Emily wouldn't have come out this far. It wasn't near any of her usual places. There were no playgrounds, no family friends, no connection. Unless someone brought her here. The thought made Rachel's skin crawl. She took photos of the area. She brought back one of the nearby twigs that had been tangled in the shoe's laces just in case. She started researching river current patterns, asked Marlowe to connect her with a hydrologist. If something, anything, had ended up in the river from near Brookridge, could it have floated this far, further? They said yes, possibly, but again, nothing pointed to Emily. Rachel went back to the wind chime. It still hadn't turned up. A neighbor claimed they saw a teenager near her fence line one night, but couldn't offer much detail. It might have been nothing, might have been everything. Then came the note, taped to her front door, under the mailbox. A third message, typed in the same font, the same blank paper. You keep chasing rivers while someone watches your door. She read it 3 times. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Someone had been on her porch. Again. No one had seen them. No prints. No footage from the street cam. It had glitched that night due to a local power outage. Rachel felt the fear crawling back in. This wasn't random. This wasn't done. Someone wanted her to know that they were ahead of her, watching her chase shadows, watching her exhaust herself. She showed the note to Marlowe. He was furious. He ordered a temporary surveillance setup, discreet, minimal, just enough to monitor the street at night without attracting attention. Rachel agreed, though she hated the feeling of being prey in her own home. That week she received no more letters, no new leads, no messages, but someone had left a single item on her porch railing one morning, a purple bead from the friendship bracelet Emily had made at camp 2 summers ago. It was unmistakable. Rachel knew it. She had helped her string it, watched as her daughter tied the final knot. Now it was back, clean, untouched, sitting perfectly still in the morning light. The purple backpack was the one item no one could find. It was a small detail at first, easily lost amid the chaos of the investigation. Yet as weeks turned into months and leads continued to dissolve into dust, the absence of that backpack began to press on Rachel's mind with quiet insistence. Children drop things. They lose shoes, scatter pencils, leave behind jackets in parks and cafeterias. But a backpack, Emily treated that backpack like it was part of her body. Inside were her notebooks, her sketch pad, her pink mechanical pencil, her lunch bag with her initials stitched in silver thread. It had her name, her smell. Her life, it should have turned up. It never did. Detective Marlowe brought it up again in early December. They sat at a diner on the edge of town where the booth still had cracked vinyl seats and the waitress knew Rachel's order by heart. Marlowe had begun meeting her in public places, somewhere neutral, as if the space itself could soften the weight of their conversations. He opened a manila folder, leafed through photographs of collected items from previous searches. Muddy clothes, a torn scarf, a shoe that looked through small. Still nothing close to that backpack. Rachel sipped her coffee. Her eyes didn't move from the window where snow was beginning to stick to the sidewalks. She thought again of the bead left on her porch railing, the same bead from Emily's friendship bracelet. No fingerprints, no DNA, no surveillance footage. The street camera, as she remembered, had failed during a storm. Again, no evidence that were being watched, or she was. The backpack, in some strange way, had become a symbol. As long as it remained missing, it suggested someone still had it. Someone was holding on, to the object, or to Emily. Rachel started to focus her attention on the item itself. What if the backpack hadn't been left behind, not because it was forgotten, but because it had value? What if it had been deliberately taken, preserved, hidden? She began looking into cases similar to hers, disappearances involving children, missing items that never resurfaced. She joined online forums under an alias, speaking with other parents, victims' families, amateur sleuths. One thread caught her attention, a case in Vermont, 4 years earlier, where a girl had vanished and her school satchel was found 3 years later in an abandoned storage locker. The girl was never located, but the discovery had reopened her case. Rachel couldn't shake the detail. A storage locker. It was the kind of place where things could be forgotten, where evidence could sleep for years. She asked Marlowe to check rental records for units within a 30-mile radius of Brookridge. He complied, but the process was tedious. Most storage companies didn't keep digital archives from more than 2 years back. Some were under new ownership, others had burned down records in office fires or floods. Still, Rachel persisted. She created a spreadsheet. She called rental offices herself, asked about auctions, monitored websites that listed unpaid or repossessed units. Then, in late January, a listing appeared on a small-town auction site hosted by a storage company in Crenshaw, 25 miles away. The item descriptions were vague: assorted boxes, clothes, child's belongings, miscellaneous school supplies. Rachel drove there the same day, arriving just as a man in flannel jeans and work boots finished loading items onto a dolly. He said he'd purchased the unit contents in an online bid, hoping to resell anything valuable. Rachel asked if he had sorted through everything yet. He shrugged, said no, said it was mostly junk. She explained her situation. She didn't show tears, she didn't beg, she simply asked if she could look through the boxes, just to be sure. The man hesitated, then nodded. They opened a box marked "School" on the asphalt beside his truck. Inside were faded notebooks, a broken water bottle, dull crayons, and near the bottom, a lavender-colored brush with loose hairs tangled in its bristles. Rachel's breath caught. The brush looked familiar. It had Emily's initials carved faintly into the side, H.A.M., a detail so small most people would overlook it. Her hands shook as she picked it up. It was scratched and worn, but unmistakable. Back at the station, Marlowe expedited the lab request. The hairs in the brush were confirmed to be Emily's. 7 months after she vanished, a piece of her had returned. But the backpack was still missing. The man who had purchased the unit claimed he never saw a backpack. The rest of the unit, about 9 boxes, contained random household items. Most of the clothes belonged to a woman in her 20s. None had name tags. No leads. The storage facility records showed the unit had been rented under a false name, with a disconnected phone number and no verified address. Paid in cash. The rental began the same week Emily disappeared and had remained active until December, when it defaulted. That meant someone had paid monthly for nearly 7 months to keep it locked. Revealed the documents herself. The signature on the rental agreement was strange, like it had been written with the opposite hand, intentionally messy. It wasn't the backpack, but it was something. Marlowe increased surveillance again. Another search of Rachel's property was conducted, this time with a team from the state. Every inch of the home, the yard, the nearby lots, was combed through. But no more beads, no more notes, no physical signs of intrusion. Rachel began sleeping downstairs. She kept her phone charged beside her at all times. The security system was checked weekly. Still, the silence persisted. Then, on a Thursday morning in early February, Rachel opened her mailbox and found another envelope. This one was smaller, folded tightly, tucked inside a plastic sandwich bag to protect it from the snow. Inside, a typed message. She liked the drawings in her sketchbook. She always drew you. Maybe that's why he kept it. Rachel closed her eyes. She imagined Emily, bent over that sketchpad, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth, drawing stick-figured mothers and curly-haired girls holding hands under the sun. The sketchbook had been in the backpack. They had it. Whoever took her, they had it. And that meant they had been watching not just Rachel, but Emily, studying, planning. The message, like the brush, proved one thing. Emily had been alive after she disappeared. Someone had touched her belongings, read her drawings, kept them. Rachel took the note to Marlowe. He said what she already knew. It was a breadcrumb, deliberate, a trail left not to be solved too quickly, but to torment. Rachel didn't cry. She folded the note neatly, put it in a folder with the others. She stared at the empty space on the wall where the backpack photo used to be, and she made a vow. If someone was playing this game, she would learn how to play it better. The discovery of Emily's hairbrush inside the Crenshaw storage locker did more than confirm she had been alive after vanishing it. She shifted Rachel's understanding of the case entirely. Up until then, everything had seemed disconnected, like torn pages from different books. But the moment she held that lavender brush, still tangled with strands of Emily's hair, she realized someone had gone to great lengths to preserve it. This wasn't a kidnap and run. This was methodical, controlled. Whoever took Emily had been deliberate not just in the act of taking her, but in what they chose to keep and what they chose to reveal. She stared at the lab report for hours, the DNA confirmation marked in black ink, as if its clarity should have brought her comfort. It didn't. The more questions it answered, the more it asked. Why store only a few of Emily's belongings? Why abandon the unit after 7 months of rent paid on time? And why now, after silence, were breadcrumbs beginning to appear again? First the bead, then the note, and now the brush. The details weren't random. Each item had meaning. The brush reminded Rachel of their nightly ritual, when she would comb through Emily's hair, both of them humming, Emily swinging her legs over the edge of the bed. That was a mother's moment, not something a stranger would understand, which made the message even clearer. Whoever was behind this knew Emily, knew Rachel, and knew what would hit hardest. Detective Marlowe kept digging into the storage facility's records, though there was little to go on. The unit had been registered under the name Glenn Lohman, an identity that didn't exist. No criminal record, no credit history, no birth certificate. The address listed was a fake, the phone disconnected. Payments had been made in cash at the office each month until December. The manager at the facility remembered the man only vaguely. No security cameras at the time, no license plate remembered, nothing to trace. Another dead end on paper, but not to Rachel. The name stuck with her. Glenn Lohman. Something about it felt off, like a mask hastily pulled together, believable only at a glance. She began typing it into forums, public databases, genealogy websites. She found nothing. Then she tried combinations, then the reverse. 3 nights later, she found a partial match, a foster agency volunteer from over a decade ago in California. The name wasn't exactly the same, Lohman, but the connection was close enough to stir something in her gut. That man had been investigated years ago for suspicious behavior involving 2 foster girls under his supervision. The case never led to charges, but a private report from the agency noted concerns about his access to child placement records. Rachel shared the file with Marlowe. He confirmed that the man had disappeared soon after the allegations and was believed to have changed his name. There were no current records, no employment history. A ghost. Rachel couldn't sleep that night. She sat in Emily's room, staring at the small dresser where her daughter's brushes used to sit, one now missing. She thought about the note left on her porch, typed so precisely, referencing Emily's sketchbook. Someone had watched. Not just Rachel, but her daughter, too, maybe for weeks, maybe longer. The idea that someone could have studied them, infiltrated the rhythm of their lives, moved among them unnoticed, made her sick. She began to wonder if the answer wasn't buried in the past few months, but further back, before the disappearance. She pulled out Emily's old school records, calendars, permission slips, anything that documented adult involvement. She highlighted every unfamiliar name. One caught her attention, a part-time art instructor who had volunteered for a short program the year before. No one had ever mentioned him during the initial investigation. She called the school. The secretary remembered him faintly, said he had been quiet. Kept to himself, only stayed a few weeks. His name, Grant Lohman. Rachel's heart dropped. She called Marlowe immediately. Within hours, a search began. The name had been used to apply for a teaching credential in another state, but the application had been withdrawn halfway through. Another alias? Likely. The trail was thin, but Rachel wasn't waiting anymore. She began visiting the parents of every child in Emily's former class, asking if they remembered the man. Most didn't. She remembered her daughter bringing home a drawing from that art program, one where the teacher had praised her heavily and given her candy afterward. She had thought it odd, but not threatening. Rachel asked if the drawing still existed. They found it in a folder under a stack of old school papers, a child's drawing, basic but detailed enough to show figures. And in the corner, a scribbled note, small and in different handwriting. "Stay quiet and smile." Rachel stared at the note. It was too neat for a child, and the phrase, it wasn't playful. It was controlling, adult, sinister. This wasn't a coincidence. She brought the drawing to Marlowe. He had it tested. The hand-highlighting was partial, but fresh. A new one, possibly from someone who had handled the folder recently. Rachel's hands trembled as she watched the evidence team seal it in plastic. If the man known as Glenn, or Grant Lohman, was the same person, he had inserted himself into their lives over a year before Emily disappeared. He hadn't just taken her, he had studied her, planted himself near them like a weed that went unnoticed until it had already taken root. This changed everything. Marlowe expanded the investigation. The FBI was alerted again. A psychological profile was commissioned. But Rachel didn't need one. She already knew. This was personal. It had been from the start. That evening, another envelope appeared. This one wasn't taped to her door or slipped into her mailbox. It had been placed inside a copy of a library book Rachel had checked out weeks ago, a gardening manual. She found it while flipping through pages. Her hands froze when she saw the folded paper tucked neatly between chapters. Inside, a single sentence, "She misses the purple room." Rachel dropped the paper. The purple room. Emily's bedroom. It had been painted lavender when they moved in. Emily loved it, had begged to keep the color. That was before the wind chimes, before the silence, before the photos turned yellow from waiting. Now Rachel understood. Someone had been inside the house. Again. After the discovery of the note inside the gardening book, a note that referenced the purple room where Emily had once slept, the investigation tilted again. Rachel's fear became heavier, but so did her clarity. Someone had entered her home and had done so undetected. The locks were untouched. The alarm system had not been tripped. Whoever had written that message knew where the manual was stored, which page to tuck the note between, and how long it would take Rachel to find it. It wasn't a hasty act. It was calculated, personal, and it confirmed what Rachel had started to believe months ago. This person wasn't just taunting her, they were guiding her. Slowly, intentionally. Rachel gave Marlowe the note immediately. Forensics took over, but she knew the outcome wouldn't change. No fingerprints, no traceable ink, no unique fibers. This wasn't a clumsy predator. It was someone who rehearsed every step. The psychological profile began to take shape: male, educated, organized, likely experienced in child interaction. Capable of manipulation, intelligent enough to evade detection. Confident enough to approach Rachel's world again and again without being caught. The behavior indicated one thing above all else: control. This person hadn't made a mistake yet, and that meant somewhere in the pattern, Rachel had to break his rhythm. A week later, while reviewing missing children databases late at night, Rachel found a photo of a teenage girl in Vermont who stopped her heart. The image was grainy, part of a small-town 4th of July parade posted on a local news site. The girl was riding on a float with other kids dressed in red, white, and blue, waving casually. Her smile was different, her hair lighter, but there was something in her eyes, something unmistakable. Rachel enlarged the photo and stared at it until her vision blurred. The girl's name was listed in the caption as Abby Carson. Emily would have been 16 now, but the resemblance was there. It wasn't just physical, it was the way the girl held herself, shoulders tense, smile guarded, as if it had been practiced. Rachel immediately contacted the news outlet. The reporter on duty confirmed the girl's identity and said she lived with a couple named Donald and Marlene Carson. They had no known biological children. They had adopted Abby from a state shelter in 2018 when she was around 11 years old. Rachel knew she had to see her. She flew to Vermont within 2 days. Marlowe arranged for local authorities to accompany her under the radio. No media, no announcement. Rachel didn't want to scare the girl, or worse, tip off whoever might be behind the adoption. The Carsons lived in a small blue house near the edge of town. When Rachel saw the girl in person, standing on the front lawn, tossing a ball to a dog, her breath caught in her throat. It was her. She was certain. Even as the girl turned and disappeared into the house, the way she moved was unmistakable. It was like watching a ghost flicker to life. The authorities approached under the guise of a routine welfare check. Rachel stayed back, watching from the car. Within 20 minutes, they returned. No immediate red flags. The girl answered to Abby. The Carsons produced paperwork. All seemed legal on the surface. But Rachel noticed something in the girl's eyes when she saw the police at the door. It wasn't fear of punishment. It was recognition. As if something long buried had stirred for a moment and vanished again. Later that evening, with help from law enforcement, Rachel was allowed a brief conversation under careful supervision. The Carsons sat nearby, close enough to interrupt if anything crossed a boundary. Rachel introduced herself only by first name, said she was from Oregon, and asked if Abby liked to draw. The girl hesitated. Then she nodded slowly. She said she used to draw all the time when she was younger, but stopped a few years ago. Rachel asked what she liked to draw. The girl looked away, mumbled something about trees and stars. Then, without prompting, she said she used to dream about a purple room. Rachel's breath hitched. She gently asked if she remembered anything else about the room. Abby shook her head, but her hand, resting on the table, had begun to tremble. The meeting ended shortly after. It was inclusive, but to Rachel, it wasn't. She saw something shifting behind the girl's eyes, like a shadow moving through fog. Marlowe submitted a quiet request for a DNA test based on Rachel's suspicions. The Carsons, perhaps sensing something, began to resist. They hired a lawyer, said they wanted to protect their daughter's privacy, claimed Abby had been through enough already, that the past should stay buried. Rachel couldn't stop. She couldn't walk away. If this girl was Emily, someone had given her a new identity, a new past, a false adoption. That meant the records had been altered by someone with access to the foster system, someone capable of forging state-level documents. And Rachel already knew one name that matched that description. J. Lomanshee dug into the Vermont adoption system, searching for gaps, found that Abby's file had redactions. One page was dated months before the official adoption was finalized. It listed a previous guardian, only initials, GL. No further detail, no signature. Rachel printed every document, every lead. She stared at the photos of Abby and compared them to Emily's last known school portrait, the same jawline, the same brow. And then she saw it on Abby's right ear, barely visible beneath her hair. A birthmark shaped like a feather. Rachel collapsed onto her knees in the hotel bathroom and sobbed for the first time in months. Was her, the birthmark settled it. Rachel knew without needing the DNA test. That feather-shaped mark behind Emily's ear had been her private anchor since the day she first held her daughter, a silent detail that no amount of memory loss or manipulation could erase. Still, in the eyes of the law, certainty demanded evidence. Marlowe, though quietly convinced by the circumstantial proof and Rachel's resolve, reminded her gently. If they wanted to bring Emily home for good, they needed undeniable documentation. And that meant unearthing the forged records that had rewritten her identity and buried her for 7 years beneath the name Abby Carson. Rachel returned to Brookridge for 3 days while legal negotiations played out in Vermont. Her lawyer coordinated with the state attorney's office, pushing for a warrant to access sealed adoption files. Rachel could barely breathe. She wasn't just fighting for truth now, she was fighting against a system that had unknowingly failed her daughter and possibly others. During those sleepless nights at home, she walked through Emily's bedroom again and again, the lavender walls, the stuffed animals arranged like they hadn't moved in years, the half-drawn sketch of their family still taped to the closet door. She studied it differently now. In the past, it had felt like a reminder of what was lost. Now, it looked like a map, a trail she had followed with nothing but instinct and the echoes of memory. 2 days later, the warrant was granted. The documents were retrieved from the Vermont Child and Family Services Department. They were older than they should have been, copies of copies, partially scanned files that looked rushed and incomplete. Rachel sat beside Marlowe in a windowless room in the local courthouse as they spread the contents across a long table. At first glance, the files seemed official. stamp stamp. But Rachel had spent the past year learning how to read between lines, and almost immediately she spotted inconsistencies. A missing hospital record from the adoption intake form, a foster evaluation that had the exact same phrasing as one filed 6 months earlier in a different case, and most notably, the guardian listed before the Carsons. One file, flagged as temporarily unverified, included a black and white photo of a man labeled Gerald Lowell. Rachel blinked. It wasn't the name she'd expected, but when Marlowe leaned forward and scanned the document, he cursed under his breath. The photo was blurry, taken from a traffic citation dated 2017, but it was enough. The face, older than the staff remembered, still resembled the man described by the storage facility owner and Miss Eleni from the school. Average build, receding hairline, always wearing a hat. Gerald Lowell. G.L. Grant Lohman. Glenn Lohman. It was all the same man. The alias trail had unraveled. He had changed names like jackets, adopted roles, slipped between states. And now, finally, they had something physical, proof that he had inserted himself into Emily's adoption under false pretenses. A minor notation in one file stated that G.L. had temporarily housed the girl for emergency placement due to an overcrowded system, but no digital log of that transfer existed. Is a pencil mark, an unofficial fix. Marlowe called it what it was, a ghost placement. Rachel clenched her fists. Her daughter had lived with this man, this predator, for an unknown stretch of time. Her mind filled with questions. How had he convinced Emily she had no family? How did he break her memory, her name, her past? Had he used fear, drugs, isolation? Rachel thought of the controlled notes, the precise language, the surgical timing of the dropped clues. He hadn't just wanted to take Emily. He had wanted to erase Rachel, to rebuild Emily in a different image. When they searched Gerald Lowell's last known residence, a one-room rental near White River Junction, they found more than they expected. Inside were boxes filled with children's artwork, school IDs, even several journals written in what appeared to be Emily's handwriting. Dated from the years immediately following her disappearance. Rachel wasn't allowed inside, but Marlowe brought her copies. The first entry was simple. He says my name is Abby now. I don't remember being anyone else. Rachel sobbed, but kept reading. He tells me my mom left because she was sick. He says I'm safe here. He says my old life was a dream. Page after page revealed the methodical psychological manipulation. The man had controlled every narrative, withheld every memory, but beneath the lines Rachel found fragments of her daughter breaking through, doodles of a small house with purple windows, stick-figure drawings of a woman with long hair holding a brush, and a reoccurring phrase, drawn in black letters, underlined twice, "One day I will remember." That was what broke Rachel. Not the lies, but the resilience. Abby had tried to hold on. Even in the dark, even when no one came, she had left herself clues. The Carsons, now informed of the deception, were devastated. They had believed the adoption was real. They had treated Abby as their own, and in many ways had protected her. Their grief was quiet but real. They agreed to allow Rachel supervised visits while the legal transition began. The DNA test came back within a week, 99.99% match. There was no more doubt. Emily Monroe had been found, but she didn't recognize her mother. The first visit was quiet. Emily had still calling herself Abby, watched Rachel like someone studying a stranger. Rachel brought a sketchbook. She laid it gently on the table between them and asked if she wanted to draw. Abby hesitated, then nodded. For 30 minutes they just drew, and then, without warning, Abby turned her paper around. It was a house, purple roof, a woman with a long braid, a child waving. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were wet. Sweet smile. Even after DNA proved the truth and the court began the process of restoring her name, Emily didn't speak of her past. Rachel sat through 5 supervised visits in Vermont, watching her daughter draw quiet, hesitant images of unfamiliar spaces, trees with no leaves, houses with no windows, people without faces. Marlowe told her not to push. Healing would come in fragments, not in declarations. Still, Rachel felt the ache every time Emily glanced away. as if holding a memory just beyond reach. The girl she had raised was inside that fragile frame, but locked behind years of indoctrination and fear. Rachel had to earn her again, not as a rescuer, but as someone safe to remember. Then came the library photo. Rachel had gone to retrieve the last of the documents submitted for the custody hearing when a clerk at the Vermont courthouse handed her an old flash drive. It was marked Evidence 291 GL. Inside were surveillance stills collected from a series of library computers used by Gerald Lowell over several years. Most showed generic web searches, transportation schedules, school district calendars, but one frame stopped Rachel cold. It was dated 3 weeks before the hairbrush had surfaced. In the corner of the screen was an open browser window, and within it, a photo Emily's second-grade class picture. Lowell had been studying it, printing it, mapping faces. In the lower corner of the frame, Rachel saw something else. A reflection, faint, almost ghost-like, captured in the screen's glare. A man watching from behind. Not Lowell. Another. Marlowe enhanced the image, sent it to their digital forensics unit. The result was chilling. The same man appeared in footage from the Brookridge Market security camera the day Emily disappeared. He had never been a suspect, had blended in, never interacted. But now he was present again, 7 years later, standing in a library in Vermont, close to the man who stole Emily's identity. Rachel pressed Marlowe. Who was he? They didn't know yet. The man had never used a name, no clear records. But he wasn't just an accomplice, he was the handler, the one who had orchestrated more than one relocation. Lowell may have abducted Emily, but this second man had helped him vanish her, and if he had done it once, he could do it again. Rachel's panic returned with a sudden, vicious weight. They increased security around the Carsons' home. Plainclothes officers monitored the area. Emily was told she had to stay inside unless escorted. She didn't argue. In fact, Rachel noticed something for the first time. Emily wasn't just reserved, she was frightened. As if she sensed the return of someone she had worked hard to forget. Rachel asked her directly during their 6th visit, "Do you remember the man who took you from school?" Emily said nothing for a long time. Then she opened her sketchbook. She drew 2 figures. One was tall, with glasses, a hat. That was Lowell, no doubt. The second figure had no face, just blank space. And beneath it, in shaky letters, she had written, "He watched but never spoke." Rachel reached across the table, but didn't touch her. The fear in Emily's eyes wasn't from imagination. It was lived. Marlowe launched a multi-state inquiry. Facial recognition programs ran in silence. Weeks passed. Then the break came. Not from a camera, not from a confession, but from a child in Minnesota. A girl named Talia, 9 years old, went missing one evening while walking home from her piano lesson. But she returned 24 hours later, alone, And when asked where she'd been, she told police. A quiet man had walked with her, said she was going to visit a friend, then let her go when she asked if her mom could come. He had called her Abby Rachel, read the transcript 3 times. He was still active. Marlowe ordered everything reevaluated. The man wasn't just hiding, he was trying again. And the fact he had used the name Abby proved he was still tracking Emily, still tangled in her story, which meant, in some twisted way, he hadn't let go. Rachel flew back to Vermont the next day. She needed to look Emily in the eye. She needed to ask one question directly, without fear, without delay. "Did you ever see him after you became Abby?" The girl stared at the wall, fingers tight around her sketchbook. She whispered. Rachel didn't breathe. "He came to the window, at the Carsons. He didn't knock. He didn't move, just watched. Then he pointed at the trees and left." Rachel wanted to scream, wanted to break every window and search every inch of the yard. But she stayed calm. She nodded. She told Emily thank you, and she swore to herself that this would not happen again. That evening, an unmarked car followed a suspicious vehicle near the edge of town. The driver fit the profile, early 60s, plain clothes, calm demeanor. He didn't resist, didn't speak. He carried no ID, nothing digital. But in the back seat of his sedan, they found a backpack. Purple, with a unicorn patch inside a sketch pad. Rachel arrived at the station before sunrise. She wasn't allowed to speak to the man, but she saw the item, laid out on a long metal table. The backpack was clean, preserved. Inside the sketch pad was a final drawing, a girl sitting beneath a tree, her eyes looking toward a window. A figure stood behind it, faceless. Underneath, one word, almost, was smaller than Rachel had expected. Not the grand, echoing space of dramas, but a modest chamber with beige walls and stiff benches. There were no cameras, no reporters, just a family law judge in a gray robe, a clerk typing steadily beside him, and a handful of people who now made up the fragile outline of Emily's world. Rachel sat at the petitioner's table, her hands folded in her lap, her shoulders tight with 7 years of waiting. Across from her, the Carsons sat quietly. Marlene clutched a tissue. Donald, with his hands neatly folded, nodding when Rachel caught his eye. They were not enemies. They had loved Emily in their own way, not knowing who she really was. Rachel had come to respect that. Emily sat between them and the judge, her back straight, eyes forward. She was dressed in a light blue cardigan, the one Rachel had bought her the week before. On the sleeve was a tiny stitched patch, a moon and stars, the symbol she used to draw in her margins as a little girl. She didn't look at Rachel. She didn't look away either. She was present, alert there by choice, and that meant more than Rachel could ever express. The judge spoke gently, verifying her identity, asking if she understood what the hearing meant. Emily responded with calm, clear answers. She acknowledged the name Abby Carson, but when asked what name she wished to carry forward, she paused. For a moment, Rachel wasn't sure she would say it. Then she lifted her chin. Emily Monroe. The words cut through the room like music. Rachel didn't cry. She felt something warmer, a soft ache of pride and grief meeting in her chest. Emily had said it herself, chosen it. No one had spoken for her. It was a reclaiming, a quiet but thunderous step toward home. The judge nodded and entered the ruling. Custody was reinstated. The adoption records under the alias were expunged. A new certificate would be issued under Emily's legal name. It was done. But Rachel knew the hardest part was only just beginning. Returning home was slow, careful. Rachel had moved into a smaller place, closer to town, safer, easier to secure. The purple room was gone now. It had been painted over years ago in a half-hearted attempt at moving on. But Emily didn't seem to mind. She chose green for her new room, sage, muted, peaceful. She picked out the curtains herself, the bedding. She didn't want stuffed animals anymore. She wanted books. Quiet. Her own corner. They moved through the days like people walking on a frozen lake, cautious, watching each step. Rachel didn't force routines. She offered suggestions, invited, never demanded. They ate in silence some nights, laughed over burnt toast others. Emily spoke more as the weeks passed, at first in brief answers, then in stories. Nothing about Lowell, nothing about the faceless man, but memories returned in smaller, stranger forms. Song lyric, a favorite cereal, the smell of cinnamon reminding her of December mornings. They began seeing a trauma therapist together. Emily was hesitant at first, reluctant to name feelings, but she responded well to art therapy. Her drawings became less abstract, more rooted, trees with visible trunks, windows that opened. Sometimes smiling, sometimes not, but whole. Rachel kept a sketch Emily had drawn years ago before the disappearance, the one with 3 stick figures and a purple house. It was faded now, but she kept it on her nightstand. She never asked Emily to recreate it. One night, though, Rachel found a new drawing tucked under her bedroom door. It showed 2 figures holding hands under a green sky. One was clearly Rachel, the other unmistakably was Emily. Braided hair, long legs, a small crescent birthmark behind the ear. At the bottom, the words, "I remember." Rachel held it for hours. The faceless man, now identified through a federal database as Lawrence Glenn Madsen, remained silent through every interrogation. He gave no confession, no motive. He requested no lawyer. He sat, hands folded, eyes forward much like Emily had, but with none of her courage. Through a complex weave of charges, child abduction, Identity fraud, conspiracy. He was convicted. The courtroom for his trial was much larger, colder. Rachel attended every day. She sat in the gallery with Marlowe at her side. When the verdict was read, she didn't cheer, didn't flinch. She just nodded once. Afterward, Marlowe walked her to her car. He had aged over the years, more silver now at his temples, more quiet in his presence. He asked if she felt closure. Not closure, Rachel said, but maybe peace. On the drive home, she passed the old Dawson's Market corner, the sidewalk where Emily had last been seen. It was quiet that morning, sunlight catching the edge of a street lamp. Rachel pulled over. She got out and stood where her daughter's footsteps had ended years ago. It didn't feel haunted anymore, just still. A place where the world had cracked open, and now, maybe, had begun to mend. Months later, they took a trip together, just the two of them. Not far, just the coast. Emily collected shells. She wrote in a new journal. She didn't talk much, but she smiled more often. One night, as they sat watching the waves, Rachel asked if she remembered the sound of the wind chimes. Emily nodded. Then, quietly, she said, "I used to think you didn't come for me." Rachel reached over, squeezed her hand. "I was always coming for you, baby." I never stopped, then watched the sea for a long time. If this story moved you, hit like and consider subscribing for more real-feeling mysteries. What do you think really happened to Emily during those missing years? And where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one.